I'm Cream Ray, your host at the One Soccer Nation podcast. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Tom Perros. Tom, thank you so much for taking the time today. How are you doing?
Good. My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for taking the time. So, Tom, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, for sure. Tom Perros, calling in from Oak Park, Illinois, just west of Chicago. I've been in the sponsorship industry for 20 some odd years. So yeah, that's kind of been the sum of my career. If we dilute it down to that, across that journey, get to work on a lot of cool sports stuff and meet a lot of cool people like Kareem here. So.
Thanks, Tom. So we go way back. We go back to 2022 where we met in Kentucky, Louisville at USL's mid-year events, which was probably one of the best stadiums that USL has. How has your experience been working specifically in soccer? Because you work across all different sports, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the soccer part has been great. Kind of the confluence of personal and professional passion. Across my career, I've had great experience working with every type of sports property and non-sports property. But any opportunity I get to work on soccer is especially fulfilling. I've worked on some of the biggest stuff. I've worked on a lot of emerging and startup kind of stuff. And I will say with a little bit of bias, some of the most fulfilling work I've done has been across USL. Because when I started first working with USL, 3 or 4 years ago, knew a little bit, not enough, but I've grown to appreciate it. Just understanding kind of why they exist and how they exist and what the big vision is. So that's been awesome.
Amazing. So, when you were working with USL, you were working with a company called Legends. Can you share a little bit about Legends and what it is and what you did at Legends?
Yeah, for sure. Legends, big company, sometimes goes by Legends Hospitality, but really working with rights holders of all shapes and sizes to help them maximize revenue. A piece of that is sponsorship. Another piece is ticketing, hospitality, F&B, you name it. My specific focus in my time there was leading the strategy and innovation group, which was part of the broader business intelligence group, really helping anyone within Legends that was selling something or trying to execute anything with the underlying data and insights and ultimately strategies and recommendations to help them get from point A to point B, whether that was revenue generation, fan engagement, or some other goal or objective.
Amazing. Yeah, I got to listen into Legends presentation at USL. You guys cover so many different areas within sports, so it's a huge company. How many employees did you guys have?
Oh gosh, it depends. Legends is a big company. We had. I'm no longer with Legends now, but we had several offices, which I would say were made up with corporate employees that kind of ran across several different divisions. But Legends also had employees operating at specific venues where they were helping manage some specific aspect. So thousands of employees across the whole Legends ecosystem. But as far as front office staff, several hundred for sure.
So, okay, so Tom, I gotta, one of my favorite questions to ask is usually, how did you get involved in the beautiful game? I kind of had to flip it here for you, and it's more so, this one's special for you. It's, obviously you've been working in sponsorship for 2 decades. So how and why did you get into sponsorship?
Yeah, the sponsorship piece is interesting. I graduated from college with my bachelor's in 2002 at the University of Illinois. Not a great job market, coming out the gate. So I was trying in vain to get any job at a big advertising agency or firm in Chicago. But there were a lot of obstacles to that, to just land the gig, to fulfill my aspiration of being the next Leo Burnett for those that follow advertising, or Don Draper, I guess more from a pop culture standpoint, but just couldn't find the right gig. So I stumbled upon a company called IEG, and they had an opening for a mostly data entry role. I knew a little bit about them, not much. I knew that their core focus was on sponsorship. So I took the gig not knowing much, and candidly, it was one of those, let's take it and see how it goes. But really learned a lot about the sponsorship medium as part of the overall marketing mix that I hadn't really understood before, since my kind of core focus in college was around advertising and kind of traditional marketing. But yeah, really came to respect it. Got to work with lots of sponsorship sellers there that again ran the gamut from sports to arts to entertainment to causes to nonprofits to professional member organizations. Really, getting to understand the landscape of brand partnerships across a diverse range of industries. And that's been part of every job, every engagement that I've had since.
So, can you give us like share the timeline of all the companies that you've been with that you specifically work in sponsorship with?
Yeah, for sure. So again, the journey started with IEG, which at the time was a family owned, family run business. They had existed since the early '80s as a newsletter and conference company. I guess a content company first, even though they didn't call it that at the time. And I came in shortly after they'd launched a consulting division, kind of organically from all the knowledge and the connections they'd made. They started building out this valuation division. So my first gig was sponsorship research there. Then because I was kind of intrigued by the, I guess, art and science piece of sponsorship. Being myself both kind of the analytical mind and creative mind a little bit, or so I thought. So I started a year later in their valuation division, across a small group of folks, where at the time it was I guess a monumental moment in developing like a very specific kind of objective third party model to assessing sponsorship and determining what we called then a fair market value. So that was a lot of fun for me. And my first love in my career was sponsorship, and my second love was valuation of sponsorships. So I spent a lot of time at IEG, kind of, I guess, standing still as a lot changed around me in the best possible ways. It got acquired at some point in the mid 2000s by actually an ad holding company, WPP, and Group M. I was then part of a much bigger kind of ecosystem. So learned how to navigate, some of those changes in kind of my everyday work. Got to work on some new unique projects, with a lot of big brands that were looking to invest in sponsorship. I then migrated into a group called ESP Properties, which was a bit of an offshoot of IEG, focused on not just the sponsorship analytics and strategy, but really building a sales arm to help execute some of those sponsorships and bring those opportunities to market. Then there was another group that then acquired the company, an experiential agency called Engine Shop, that brought IEG into its fold, and I was part of that group for a little bit. And that was, I'm shortening it up a bit, but that was probably like the first 14 or 15 years of my career was being part of that IEG ecosystem. As that ecosystem changed a lot with different ownership, mergers, acquisitions, reimaginings, evolutions. The industry obviously changed a lot, but I got to learn a lot there and do a lot there. And then fast forward to, January or February of 2020. I had a little bit of fatigue from, being in, just kind of the same, even with all the changes, but the same, agency ecosystem. So thought I'd learned enough, I'd met enough people, where I thought I'd hang my own shingle and try and do things alone a little bit after I fell out of that organization, and launched Siege Sponsorship, which is my independent consultancy. That first go around was about 3 weeks before COVID shut down the world. So, I was immediately regretting my decision, as I had a couple clients lined up, and then all of a sudden they vanished as everything shut down. And certainly, like, sports weren't happening, entertainment and events weren't happening. But, I stuck with it, and where I found, I guess, success in the least likely places for me, where I was failing, over and over again to find either a property, like a sponsorship seller that needed some help with strategy or analytics, because they just were operating on fumes. Couldn't find a brand to spend money with me. Where I found the most success, and a lot of it was inbound through my network, was a lot of agencies and consultancies that had to furlough or lay off staff during COVID. They still had some active contracts with clients, a lot of those including services that I was pretty good at fulfilling, like, again, sponsorship strategy, evaluation, measurement, and the like. So I think my first 3 or 4 clients were actually agencies in Chicago, outside of Chicago, that just needed, essentially a gun for hire to kind of, help them fulfill those contracts, keep the lights on as they weathered the storm of COVID. And that led me all kinds of places, expanded my network, expanded my skill set, because, again, as an independent consultant, you have to do more with less. And luckily I had, like, a great group of collaborators too that can plug into my projects, and I could plug into theirs. And I didn't know what end game was going to be. Things started going really, really well, from an agency client standpoint. One of those clients was an agency called Forefront, who was great. Like, they had the right mix of people and kind of, creativity meets analytics, where I liked, kind of sitting squarely in the center. So I was doing some work for them, and along that path, they actually got acquired by Legends. So that brought me to Legends. It was one of those moments in my career where I was like, man, I'm building my thing. It's going really well. And now one of my, largest clients at the time just got acquired. Now they want to bring me into the fold full time. And it was hard. It was hard. Like, when it rains, it pours. Like, I would have done anything to get, like, an offer like that, earlier in COVID, as I was struggling to make ends meet for a little bit and weather the storm like everybody else. But, it seemed like a great opportunity at the time. It was a role not, solely focused on sponsorship strategy and valuation, but one that could, again, help me develop my skill set in other areas of fan engagement and revenue generation, but really, again, sitting at the center of what Legends called the wheel, to kind of support all these different groups to achieve their objectives. And now fast forward a little bit further, I exited Legends in November, and now I am, I guess, turning the Siege Sponsorship kind of independent consultant piece of myself back on, and working on lots of cool projects, lots of fun stuff to look forward to in 2025.
Amazing. I mean, so, having, would you say having a job provides security, and then, being an entrepreneur, owning your own company, maybe not having that much security per se? How do you find yourself transitioning between the both? Is it hard for you? Is it easy? Do you like the challenge? Because, I mean, this is just my perspective, an outsider perspective from that, is that I feel that having a job is just so secure versus being on your own, where you have to make the magic happen. But that's just my perspective. I'm
Yeah.
interested to hear what your experience has been.
No, for sure. It's a great question. I know you're an entrepreneur yourself, so I'm sure you've got some strong perspectives on it. Yeah, I mean, challenges on both sides. I often joke, like, from a stability standpoint, I got some of the biggest projects and biggest paychecks of my life being an independent consultant. It was like super exciting, and I'd like show my wife and my kids at the time. But then you'd have weeks, if not months, that go by till you see that next big paycheck, and that's not for the faint of heart. I've got a little bit of the entrepreneurial spirit. My dad was an entrepreneur. He was an immigrant that came over here, built his own business. But yeah, man, it's not easy. So again, pros and cons for both sides. Nice to have a steady paycheck, right? But also nice to know that you're putting in all the work to land a project and fulfill a project, and even more invested in a client's success when you're on your own. So yeah, I love the thrill of independent consultancy, while also loving the stability of a steady biweekly paycheck.
Absolutely. So, what has been the most exciting project that you've worked on?
Oh man, that's tough. Been a lot of fun ones, a lot of projects that people would dream to be part of, just based on like some of the brand name, sports clients, or other properties. But I'll say USL, and I promise you that's not just filler, because we both have vested interest in USL as a league. But like I mentioned earlier, didn't know much about USL. Different kind of challenge for I don't even know if we could call it an emerging property. I mean, they're not new, right? USL has been around, but different challenges from dealing with some of my clients in the past that are doing just fine financially, but want to generate more revenue, right? Where they see more opportunity, versus properties that really need a foundation, from a sponsorship standpoint, to generate that revenue, sometimes for survival. And not speaking for USL as a league specifically, but certainly, there's teams out there in USL and otherwise that, really count on sponsorship revenue, again, to keep the lights on for themselves. So I think, I found USL being one of those properties that I was thrown into. It was one of my first projects at Legends. So I had to, expedite my own education, but also, use that as an opportunity to ask some dumb questions that were probably like some pretty good questions. Because I think for USL, and folks at the league office might agree, at a time, um, you know, you couldn't go to market looking for sponsors operating under the assumption that everybody knew who USL was. That was just reality. Or that they knew exactly who USL was, right? They may have some preconceived notions, knowing like, oh, there's MLS, then there's this, or, whatever they'd compare it to, probably wrongly. So, what was interesting for me is I was educating myself on USL. I found that useful to ask some of the dumb questions, and I'd like to think, have USL, to the extent I could, reflect on some of those questions too. Because I think where they've seen success and where they'll continue to see success is they realized, there was an education piece they needed to do out in the marketplace first before they started reaching out, asking for brand dollars or sponsorships. They certainly had sponsors on board, before Legends, um, uh, you know, joined up to help them in some of those efforts. But I think what was most fruitful for them was developing a kind of a pre-sales strategy of how they can talk to the brand community about what USL is, really, really streamline what their value proposition was, kind of work on the storytelling elements, really work on knowing what their unique selling proposition was, not as a we're this, not that in a negative way, but really kind of showing the positives of what the USL platform can provide that perhaps contemporaries in the industry might not be able to provide. So I think that was a lot of fun for me. Also because of its like lack of transactional nature. I mean, in this, not just in this industry, but when you work with clients on sponsor valuation or measurement or strategies, some of those are pretty short term engagements, relatively speaking. You don't always, even if you think your work was great and your client told you so, the relationship, from a contractual standpoint, sometimes doesn't last long enough to kind of see through, I guess, the fruits of your efforts. Whereas like USL, it was kind of one of those iterative long-term engagements where, there were milestones along the way. And, as a small part of the team helping USL, it was really exciting for me to kind of see some of the strategies we recommended, and help them implement kind of come to the fore.
Amazing. Did you go to a lot of the games?
No, no. No, I will say, like, I went to three summer showcases. I think that's right. In Louisville, as you mentioned, in Colorado Springs, and I don't recall the other one right now off the top of my head. But I went to those on official business. I don't have a USL team in my backyard, and since we were working with the league specifically, we were mostly dealing with the folks with Tampa. I mean, there was a team element as far as, like, the education and the strategy development. But professionally didn't make it out to as many USL matches as I'd like, and certainly before, working with USL in a professional capacity, I had not attended a match before that.
Got it. Tom, what's your sport? I don't think I've ever asked you that.
Yeah, it's soccer, man.
Yeah.
I honestly, I never going back to, like, my story of college and then, like, early professional career. I never thought I'd really be, like, working in soccer, but soccer was one of my sports growing up. I played 4 years in high school. I wasn't as good as you were or still are, Kareem, but I played. Part of that was embedded kind of in my own upbringing and culture. Again, my parents came from Greece. My dad was a big soccer fan. His club is Olympiakos still to this day. I've had the privilege to get to attend some matches with him, and we just played casually growing up. I'd go to Greece to visit family occasionally. I was playing a bit of basketball more often than soccer in the States. But, as I visited cousins, I started playing more and more soccer because I thought, man, those guys are better than me. Next time I go to Greece, I got to kind of show them up. And yeah, even as a fan, I'm old enough to remember when you couldn't watch much soccer here in the States. I remember Fox Sports World being this kind of like oddity on my TV before it became Fox Soccer Channel, where that really introduced me to these big clubs that I'd heard of, but never really seen, especially those outside of the United States. So I quickly became a fan of the game from a global standpoint. I was watching whatever I could domestically. Catching very bad feeds of Olympiakos with my dad. Again, starting to watch a lot of English soccer and Spanish soccer and Italian soccer and whatever I could. Along that path, became a fan of Tottenham Hotspur, unfortunately. And the heartache that comes with supporting a great club like that doesn't always perform the way it should. So yeah, a bit of a rant there, but yeah, I love soccer. I love the community it builds. I love watching the game at every level. And yeah, having had the ability over the last 20 plus years to work with some of the biggest clubs, and also, to work with clubs kind of starting from scratch, it's been super fulfilling.
Especially like where the game is going now with all the upcoming events. I mean, Copa America just passed, but we have the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup, 2026 World Cup, 2028 Olympics, and maybe a 2031 Women's FIFA World Cup. So a lot of soccer is going to be played in America, which is super exciting. And it's just going to raise all the boats. So exciting to see. With saying that, you've developed roadmaps for leagues, team, and entertainment properties to grow and engage fandom in various markets. Can you share an example of a successful fan engagement strategy you've implemented in soccer? And what key lessons can be applied to new or growing clubs like those in USL?
Yeah, for sure. I think broadly speaking, there have been lots of great examples of work I've been able to be a part of. Again, across established leagues or teams that might need a roadmap for something like growing audiences in a new or desired market. And then also those, I guess more emerging leagues and new teams even that have started to build audiences from scratch, which is a fun and challenging white space to tackle. Um, to look at a recent example, I worked with a European soccer club, itself a successful team, but a challenger of sorts, kind of sitting outside of the top four or top five European soccer leagues. But along those same lines of all the things happening in soccer, including domestically here in North America, they're a team that will be in the FIFA Club World Cup next year, and they saw that as looking at that as a moment in the time in the future. They saw it as an opportunity now, in this year, to really start thinking through, how can they leverage the lead up to that, and then certainly think through, the time in the Club World Cup itself, as well as coming out of the Club World Cup, to really develop again this roadmap, like you called it, to really engage new fans and grow fans in other markets, including this massive one that we have here in the U.S. and in North America. I think what was most critical there as a starting place was having ourselves as the team helping this club, and also encouraging them to it's a little bit of crawl before you can walk before you can run. Really ensuring that they had a thorough understanding of their current fan base before they start, looking at expanding other ones. And we, tell clients like that, and I tell clients like that, that's a better starting point, with deference and respect. But what the intention is, it's amazing how much easier it is to find and engage new audiences once you really understand all the nuances and motivators of your existing audiences. Why do they follow the team? How do they engage with the team in person or digitally or virtually or whatever other way? What causes or issues do they care about? What do they do when they're not watching soccer or going to a match, right? Once you can break down those things into clear, audience segments or buckets, it becomes considerably easier to find ways to engage and grow those audiences, because you're focusing on the right things. It's not just the desire every club or team has to like grow audiences, but what are the things that have worked for us already, even in our backyard, to grow audiences or better engage audiences. There are insights, there are nuggets in there that can really be lucrative to developing, a roadmap for finding those new audiences before you just kind of jump into tactics and kind of go to market.
You've worked on creating authentic and mutually beneficial platforms between brands and audiences. In your experience, what are the critical elements of a successful partnership between a soccer club and a corporate sponsor?
Yeah. I think for starters, aligned expectations. And what I mean by that is, I've heard lots of teams in sponsorship sellers, talk the talk about, needing to understand a brand's marketing objectives and crafting a package or a platform or a proposal, whatever you want to call it, that addresses those needs. But not all of them walk the walk, because walking the walk is hard. And again, sometimes it's a volume game, right? Batting averages, that's a bad metaphor for soccer, but we're not just talking soccer. You have to have a lot of conversations. You have to like churn out proposals sometimes. And, a lot of times that is necessity, but can be to the detriment of really like thoughtfully curating and doing the diligence you need to make sure that a brand that you're pitching is actually aligned on any level. Again, we'll call them rights holders, anybody selling sponsorship, it's tempting to maximize value of the stuff you have, of the assets you have, because that's easier. Customizing something for a specific brand or category that takes work, that takes diligence. It's hard. It's definitely harder. But some of the best partnerships that I've seen, and I'm sure most of us have seen, they're lighter on assets, the somewhat transactional assets that are, part and parcel to any sponsorship, but it's kind of table stakes, right? You're going to get, with few exceptions, you're going to get signage, you're going to get tickets, you're going to get whatever. But really, those are just, pieces and enablers of something bigger, right? Like the best partnerships are heavier on platforms or purpose or really storytelling, right? That's authentically bringing in the rights holder and the brand and the audience, right? Creating that Venn diagram where there's something that matters in the middle to all three, of mutual benefit. And not just a bundle of assets or stuff off the menu. So it's a bit cliche, but really thoughtfully looking at sponsorships or partnerships as a solution to someone's challenge. I think that helps center what a partnership or a platform or a proposal should look like, versus kind of the transaction of selling sponsorship. So yeah, I mean, and I think, again, that alignment and transparency, that goes a long way to helping close deals, to helping renew deals with existing sponsors, even if you have to shift some things after you've kind of had a trial of 1 year or 2 year or whatever, and really helping maximize revenue and value for all the stakeholders involved. So yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned the top revenue. I mean, top two revenues in USL is ticket sales and sponsorship. And from my understanding, one of the biggest sponsorships is the naming rights sponsorships for clubs, as long as they own the club, the stadium that they're getting the naming rights sponsorship. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, besides like shirt sponsorship, yeah, I mean, naming rights for any venue, not just in the USL, could be super lucrative, especially if you're in a big market, especially if attendances are maximized, especially if there's ancillary or third-party events that happen in the stadium. Sometimes you have a men's team and a women's team that are playing in the stadium. But yeah, naming rights can be super lucrative. I think that's a good example because sometimes teams, after they've sold, major assets, right, the tentpole stuff like naming rights or shirt sponsorships, they feel like, there's not much left. But I think, that's where the storytelling and positioning has to take place. And even going back to the naming rights partnerships, I think, the best naming rights sponsorships are not just the name on a building, right? They are 360. They are thoughtful. There's a reason that brand puts their name on the building. There's a reason that fans should care about that. It's not just a money grab. It's not just a big company spending their marketing dollars. There's a narrative around it that's authentic, not just for optics, but that sponsor is doing something with the club beyond just putting its name on the building and waiting for exposure or media impressions. There is something else. There's a bigger platform at play than just the anchor of a naming rights.
So I remember what I was going to say now. So announcement, we just recently brought on Tom to our advisory board at One Soccer Nation. So super excited to work with Tom. We've been building our relationship for the last 3 years. So recently, behind the scenes, Tom's shared more of his works with us to help assist with the club that we're working on launching with at One Soccer Nation. And to see the amount of detail and expertise that goes specifically into sponsorship, it always amazes me. And anything that anyone specializes in, and the amount of detail and work that goes into it. So that's what I was going to mention. Behind the scenes, seeing the work that you do, Tom, is it's always amazing to see someone's expertise. And I think, again, you're providing so much value on this interview and with us as well. Where, I think that, anyone building something, it's always important to have people that have the experience and expertise to be alongside you in regards to bringing your dreams to reality. So that's what I was just going to mention, Tom, was the amount of detail that goes into sponsorship was I was just mind blown. I've done my own research, my own learning curve with sponsorship, but obviously I haven't had the experience or the amount of time or years put into that. specifically. So it's, I mean, for me, I just wanted to mention that it's so cool, and I'm learning a ton from you, and it's very interesting because I think one thing that just always keeps me on my toes is that there's so much detail in regards to anything in life, that there's so much detail that goes into whatever you're going to be doing, and it's very sophisticated. So that's what I wanted to mention earlier, but now I remember.
Yeah. No, no, I appreciate you saying that, man. Yeah, and again, thank you for having me on board at One Soccer Nation. It's been fun so far, and I know it's going to be even more fun, next year and beyond. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the work that goes into some of the stuff I do and a lot of others do, across the sponsorship discipline, yeah, you really got to like it, right? And I think um, one of the challenges that sponsorship had for years in this space and continues to have is, you know, its provability as a good investment, right? Its measurability to compared to like other marketing mediums that have well established, metrics to them. Sponsorships come a long way, even since I started dabbling 20 some odd years ago. But I think that's some of the fun part there, right? Because sometimes, even as I talk, maybe to to some folks that will roll their eyes, sometimes you have to quantify, the seemingly unquantifiable, right? Or put value or metrics behind something that's largely qualitative, or we used to call it intangible. We still do sometimes. But that's some of the fun of it, right? Because if I didn't think there was something special about sponsorship, I probably wouldn't have been a practitioner as long as I have been, right? That compared to anything else across the marketing mix, and again, some people will fight me on this one, and that's okay. I would love a debate. There's something super special about sponsorship that's a lot less transactional when done right? Where it's not the only way you can tap into fan passions as a brand to really kind of like leverage the halo and all the great things that property does. But again, when executed well, it could provide a lot of value, quantifiably and qualitatively, I guess, that I still feel, other marketing mediums can't touch.
How is sponsorship special to you?
Yeah, for sure. My I've worked on like both sides of the equation if we make it binary, right? Working with properties that are trying to sell sponsorship as well as brands that are looking to invest in sponsorship. I'd say, a majority of the work, like earlier to mid career, was with those sponsorship sellers. And again, on a very human, personal level, across the gamut of like, small local property to like massive global property, you find people that care about the thing that they're doing, right? It's not just about revenue generation or revenue maximization or finding brands, but really like we love what we do. We believe in some of these even, more qualitative and tangible things. We just need to find a way to get like brands to see that and see how passionate our audiences are and convince them that their spend is much more um, effective, if not always efficient. Even with investing with a smaller engaged audience than we provide, versus like a large media buy that's obviously going to deliver more eyeballs and impressions. And again, helping them sell that, helping them position that, helping prove that out, that a small engaged audience that really, really cares about a thing, whether that's a soccer team or an entertainment property or something else, can go a long way in building, lifetime fans in value, much more so than an ad buy.
And I wanted to ask you, like, obviously through time things change. So 20 years being in the game, what would you say has been the biggest change in sponsorship?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, it's funny when I was helping, refine some of the valuation methodologies at IEG once upon a time. Um, Digital was your owned website and probably a pretty crappy one at that point. Social didn't exist, right? We didn't use words like content or virtual or even engagement to an extent. So it really has been like an everyday kind of study and adaptation of how just consumer behavior is changing, how technology is changing, how the trends are changing, to really try and keep up, even before trying to develop methodologies to evaluate the new thing or the thing that's like changed significantly overnight with the advent of a new technology. It's just really being a regular and thoughtful study of all changes. Again, not just in tech, not just in media, but also just culturally, right? What's changing? Why is a sponsorship platform with the team more important or more valuable today than it was yesterday, or not as valuable today as it was yesterday? There's a lot of ways to answer those questions and skin that cat. But again, constantly challenging yourself to stay up to date, and then using that context to kind of sharpen your skill set for how to assess something or recommend something. That's super important.
It kind of, your answer kind of reminds me of the book Think and Grow Rich, where, the world's constantly changing and evolving. We need new leaders, new entrepreneurs, new companies, new technology. And it's, you have these things that change and that come up in regards to the evolution of new words that you had mentioned, content, engagement, etc., and new technology. So that was pretty interesting to hear. With saying that you have over 2,000 valuation engagements under your belt, including high-profile soccer properties like Juventus, Liverpool FC. What trends are you seeing in how sponsorship value is evolving in soccer? And how can emerging clubs maximize their appeal to potential sponsors?
Yeah, good question again. I'll answer, I think, the second part first. I think a lesson learned through emerging leagues, again, I mentioned this a bit earlier, was really taking an honest pulse of where you are as a league or as a club or as a property, before rushing to market to sell something or even to make a connection. I think USL did that well. They recognized that they were emerging league on some fronts, and really needed to have the ability to really understand and educate the marketplace before they went to market. From a value alignment standpoint, a brand that had never heard of USL is going to naturally fall back on, I guess, familiar comps, right? Sometimes naively, and compare, the proposal or the asking price to the next closest thing, like MLS or something else, geographically in the market that they find similar. And that could cut both ways. So I think, it's important to really plant a flag and kind of try to own the narrative to the extent you can about who you are. Because failing to do that will leave it to, prospective brands to, focus on who you are not, or have the wrong idea of who you are. So I don't even know if that was answering the second part first, but getting to kind of the evolution of I guess sponsorship value, if that was a question. I think there's been a continual shift, over the last decade, especially, to valuing audiences instead of assets, right? And that too could probably sound a little cliche, but there was a time, I think, when valuation, of a sponsorship was really a one-size-fits-all approach to valuing signage in a vacuum, or activation in a vacuum, or hospitality in a vacuum. We found over time, and I found over time, that brands, were clearly willing to pay more for a sponsorship of a property that intimately knew who their audience was and knew things about them, whether that was through primary research and surveys, or secondary data collection, and ability to share that kind of information with a prospective sponsor. Brands were willing to pay more than that. So it was a bit of an aha moment. And brands would be willing to spend even more on a sponsorship, where that provable for lack of a better term, audience profile aligned with the desired audience of that brand. So I think it was, again, one of those things where it was like hard to kind of put a fine point on it, where, even the savviest sponsorship sellers weren't able to um, prove that my audience is more valuable, even at the level of, my signage is more valuable because it is being put in front of an audience that aligns better than these other ones. But that's really been this kind of continuous, I guess, evolution of the marketplace, not just from a valuation standpoint, but entire agencies have kind of sprung up that are focused on kind of this audience first approach to selling sponsorship, or really selling anything that they're trying to sell.
Good. Thank you for sharing that, Tom.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears here to international growth opportunities. We talked about being in a different era with new technology, globalization. Soccer clubs are increasingly focusing on international markets to grow their fan base and revenue streams. Based on your experience, what strategies have proven most effective for teams looking to expand their presence globally, and how can smaller clubs tap into this potential?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that too, for risk of sounding like a broken record, I mean, it starts with the data, right? A lot of that audience data, but also making sure you don't, even with some of the data in hand, bite off more than you can chew. And what I mean by that is, just taking a specific example, I recently worked with we'll call them like a medium-sized club that was looking to grow audiences and brands in different markets. Is different than the European club I mentioned earlier. But it was a club outside of the U.S. that wanted to grow, again, in the U.S. and in other markets internationally as well. So I think the soundest advice I and my team were able to give them was, in spite of the desire to really grow everywhere and fast, and even with the data kind of in hand to prove out that there was enough information there to support a strategy in audience growth in all those markets. You know, Told them they can be a lot more successful, taking a more thoughtful, I guess, stepped approach, with some milestones, along the way, where, again, kind of, if you prioritize everything, you're prioritizing nothing. We told them, whether they use the audience data as a guide, or the kind of broader data as a guide, or even their aspiration as a guide. Let's start with one market. Let's, again, validate through the data why we should be there or try and grow there, and focus on that, get some learnings along the way, and then let's tackle the next market. And it seems obvious, but I think, a lot of clubs and teams feel like they're up against it, right? Like, we're going to miss it. Like, even with some of the major events coming, if we don't try and grow in all these markets around, you name it, major global or international event, we're going to miss the mark. I don't think that's always true. I think, if you focus on the one thing that you can be really good at, because there's limited time, there's limited resources, sometimes there's limited competencies to kind of tackle everything at once. Start small first, and find the best path forward. And as far as actions, even if you pick a specific target market and you say, I want to grow audiences there, don't try and do everything, right? Don't automatically assume that should mean a friendly tour in that marketplace, and a social and digital strategy to engage and grow audiences in that marketplace, and something else, a fan fest, right? You probably don't have the funds or time or capacity to do all those things. So pick the one market, pick the one thing that you think can give you the best bang for your buck, and really make the biggest splash, whether that's from a media standpoint or directly impacting and engaging people in that market, and start there.
Absolutely. You had mentioned, and we're coming towards the end here. You had mentioned, I think it was three things that you really enjoy in sponsorship. I think it was sponsorship, valuation, and a third thing that you had mentioned. Or was it just those two? Those are your two favorite.
Yeah, those are two of my favorite. I can't remember what the third was, candidly, but
So between sponsorship and valuation, which one do you prefer to work on more?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good question. You know, I won't even say it's two sides of the same coin, but I think, sponsorship is a medium. Again, I'm passionate about. You know, valuation can mean a lot of things. So I think, again, it is of the utmost important to make sure that's the right tool for the job. Like sometimes teams will use valuation to set price or build a rate card. Sometimes they use it as a way to um, provide a recap report or fulfillment report to a sponsor, like before renewal, to say, like, look, here's all the value we delivered beyond just what was contractual value, right? Which should help prove to the sponsor, at least on that one level, that the property is over delivered and delivered good value to them. It could be used to actually try and prove out, return on specific objectives that a brand had, or even, an ROI analysis to show how it moved the needle for their business, not just from kind of a dollars and cents like sponsored value standpoint. So I love valuation as a discipline. Um, but even, across those three or four examples, um, you can't just stop at a number, which, that's why, like, sponsorship more broadly and getting into some of the strategic elements, not just the analytical elements, is one of my favorite parts. Sometimes valuation might be the first thing. And besides having an output that's like a number, like dollars and cents, you learn a lot of things along the way that might not translate to a dollar number, but, derive an insight that can actually help make a strategic recommendation to your client to go another path. Like, hey, here's an asset that's like driving a lot of value, but you're not even like building it in. Or here is something you did with a specific sponsor that was actually not driving much value. So maybe we should pivot to something else that's drives more value, is actually easier for us to implement, and we'll have more ROI for them in the long run. So not answering directly, but I think sponsorship as a medium, my favorite thing. Valuation as a tool to assess and strategically point people in the right direction. Another love of mine along the same line.
Understood. Well, Tom, I'm so happy we got to spend some more time together. I got to learn more about you, more about what you have done and what you're currently working on. And if it's cool with you, I'd like to ask some lighthearted questions, some fun ones, some speed questions to end off.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, what's your favorite food?
This is hard. Oh man, I say that as somebody who's got three daughters who eat only two or three things. I'm looking around my shoulder to make sure they're not there. Favorite food, even though I don't have it very often, I must say it because my dad, he owned a fast food shop for 30 some odd years. A gyros. If you've ever had a good gyros sandwich, that's one of my weaknesses.
That's the first time I'm hearing about this. I got to check it out.
Oh man, I'll point you the right direction.
You got to send me something later.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Favorite artist musically?
Lots. I mean, Pink Floyd is kind of a lifelong love of mine, knowing that, I was still came of age in musical interests like long after they'd mostly wrapped up. But Pink Floyd is probably my singularly favorite artist ever.
Favorite activity?
Soccer. So I actually it's probably the only thing that kind of keeps me in shape in my middle age. But I still play twice a week. Right now it's indoor weather in Chicago. So not only because I love the sport, but compared to running, where I'm left alone with all of my thoughts, sometimes having too many of them, when I play soccer, I just play soccer. I am focused on receiving the ball or kicking the ball or tackling. And it's such a good like break from reality. Because I think of nothing other than playing soccer when I'm playing soccer.
It's pretty nice, that feeling that you get when you're playing. Like everything else just doesn't exist for a moment.
Oh, it's wonderful. Therapeutic.
What position did you play growing up, and what do you play now?
Yeah, for sure. I was, mostly an outside midfielder, sometimes playing defensively as a right back as well. Um, I think I was okay at either of those. Never quite trusted enough to play in a more kind of centralized position. That was always hard. wasn't always great. Pivoting and keeping my head on a swivel. I'd say now that's some of the fun. Playing indoor, it's 5-a-sides or 4-a-sides or sometimes 8-a-sides, depending on who we could get. I wouldn't say we really have a formation, but I love now because I think playing with some old dudes and old ladies, as part of this kind of recreational soccer league. I think I'm for the first time in my life like a little faster and quicker than people my age. So I'll play in a more attacking position, make those runs behind the defense because people are tired and lazy. And for the first time in my life, actually banging in some goals. So that's good.
Oh, well, you're still young, man. Still young.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Awesome. And I got your favorite team, Tottenham Spurs, in the EPL. But I guess the last one I'll ask is favorite player, all-time favorite player.
That is really hard. I mean, I will say, obviously some of the greatest players, right, were before our time. So we've seen footage and kind of grown to admire them that way. I'm going to pick a maybe not obvious Tottenham Hotspur player that was one of my favorites. Probably going on almost 2 decades ago at this point, which is crazy. Dimitar Berbatov, Bulgarian striker, went on to play for Manchester United after Tottenham and had some success there. But just his style of play was so refreshing, and I think it was mostly because it was a little bit of a don't judge a book by its cover. I think a lot of people early on criticized him. They thought he was too lazy, not working hard, but he was just so good at controlling the ball and making the hard stuff look easy and kind of exuding a bit of nonchalance on the pitch that it was actually like really impressive. It was really beautiful. It was perfectly on brand for Tottenham, who prides themselves maybe too much to the detriment of winning big trophies and things, just playing the game beautifully, right? And doing it with flair and pizzazz. And if you're going to lose with style. Hopefully you win with style. But Dimitar Berbatov was even in his relatively short tenure, was one of my favorite players that I got to experience on TV and in person once.
Thanks. Well, Tom, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate you taking the time for being on the One Soccer Nation podcast.
All right, Kareem, my pleasure. Thank you so much. Can't wait to watch this. Hopefully you don't have to edit too much of my stuff out, but it's been awesome. So thank you again. Really appreciate it.